everyone. My name is Shannon Byrnes, and I'll throw in that slide. So I am a Net DevOps engineer for Internet 2, and I'll ask a quick question. How many of y'all are part of the research and education community? Yeah, that's awesome. So Internet 2, if you aren't familiar with it, whenever I talk with my Aunt Kathy, I explain it to her that's like an ISP, but for like universities. In a more general sense, if you aren't familiar, now that I'm in a room of network engineers, it is a national research and education network that supports a wide community of members that are research and education. So that includes universities, obviously, but that includes, of course, a whole lot more, as well as industry members, cloud participants, all that good stuff. So I went through that whole explanation, but this is the slide that my marketing team gave me, and I feel a little obligated to throw it up there. It has a lot of nice things on it. This one, too, has lots of numbers. Everybody loves numbers. That's why it says numbers and big characters there in the middle. But for this, my talk is 10 obscure things that I learned automating. And I have a foreword here, but I'm actually going to add to it a little bit. So one thing I'm going to add is Dinesh mentioned in his wonderful keynote that you can spend your whole life finding out what you shouldn't be doing, what you shouldn't be playing, right? I am certain there is a lot of that in here, so be prepared. Lots of things we probably didn't have to do. As you can see up there, most of my experiences come from a Cisco shop. Before I was at Internet 2, I was at a university. Now, I think it was less so at the time, but when I was there, it was a little over 3,000 wired devices and over 10,000 APs, so certainly we had our jobs cut out for us. What you're going to see today, too, is relying on my memory. So I made this slide deck far long after I did all this, but I thought it was so cool to share all these little things that I had found, little frustrations from one of the most fun technical challenges I've ever faced. So here we go. So this one may be very familiar to some of you if you've used, there we go, any CLI scraping, SSH-based logging into devices to, take a look at what you have going on there. And when I started out, I didn't have a strong understanding. I was junior, right, essentially I'm a network engineer, I had some system administration, I had some programming experience. This is my first time automating against network devices. And just randomly, things would fail, and it was very confusing, and it took me way too long to figure out that I was actually just DOSing our TACX server. So being able to tweak NetMiko, which, if you aren't familiar, is a fantastic Python library for SSHing into your devices, doing some tweaks there helped quite a bit. So, number 2. This is actually probably one of my favorite slides. So I know there's a lot going on this slide. There'll be a couple like that. But one of the critical steps of our network automation journey is populating I actually hate the term source of truth, but populating our instance of NetBox with our infrastructure. And a big part of that was wanting to populate the exact PID. So you go into cisco.com and you search for the actual part IDs. You want it to match that, right? Especially when you're keeping an eye out for like end of life announcements that you're gonna ignore until the device actually dies. But with some of the older devices, this was a very obscure thing I found. So this was a demonstration of where napalm was confusing to me, and it's not napalm's fault. But you can see from the code up here at the top right, it is trying to locate a line when running show version that contains bytes of. And you can see it here, I'm standing in front of the slide, that's exactly what it's pulling. But that's not actually a part ID. You can actually go to, well, now the Wayback Machine of Cisco.com and see that actually isn't a legitimate part ID. And so I wish I could remember the specific problems we had with that, but as a result, but that was kind of a first foray. And this is actually was a big reason why we moved to using CLI scraping, but with a focus on show inventory commands. And so that's when you're actually truly listing the part IDs. Of course, you're often listing, optics, or we had a lot of stack switches, so it was helpful for that too. But yes, I think this one was an interesting one. It's not the only one like it. Here's number 3. Monitoring software may be best effort at trying to discover PIS, which is why we went down the Python route to begin with. If you recognize this UI right here, I am sorry. Putting that aside, the actual data that's populated, I'll point out a couple. You'll notice there's a lot of Catalyst 9500s that are 16 port here, but they're listed in the other useful column as being 40. There was a lot of this, and sometimes neither was correct. And this was important when we wanted to build reports on what images were running on our devices. Okay, we did OS upgrades. Are we all up to par? Right? We needed this to kind of be right. That ended up being a challenge as well. Number 4. So this was kind of similar to the first one. So me kind of learning things. We had a few different pairs of ASA firewalls. And we ran, of course, MPLS on our campus. And what I didn't realize is when I wanted to log in to these devices, I'm actually logging into the virtual context, which is probably not what I wanted to do in the first place. But I did it anyway, and I did it all at the same time, which can also look really weird, especially because it looks different than, say, authentication issues or timeout issues. It just says socket is closed. So that was a unique experience, kind of finding that out. And I will mention the lifesaver with some of the CLI scraping here when you're using NetMiko, Napalm, Nornir. Remember, you can change your debug log level, or you change your log level to debug. And it is, grab your coffee and take a good look. It might take you a little time, but it'll help you. This one was fun. So I don't think we were actually trying to do this on purpose. I don't know why I know this, but apparently I discovered it. And you can see, when I left the university, I stole all my own code. All my own code. There we go, words. So I can refer to it, for educational purposes in the future. This is what I documented. If there is someone in the world who wanted to pick up the masochistic product of getting a full understanding of exactly what behavior would be on what platform when you run something like a rollback, when you're using a Cisco feature like archiving, I don't know why you would ever do that. So pretty much just documented, don't do it. Bad, you might end up with things after your deny statement. So that's not fun. This is probably, I think this is the one slide I have that isn't exclusively Cisco. So a while back, me and a few colleagues provided a workshop, and we spun up a lab in Container Lab. One of the things that we want to do is we want to make it multi-vendor. We want to demonstrate that this is possible with everything, and so we did Juniper as one of our devices. It was fun and confusing, and I had to ask embarrassing questions. I hadn't worked on Juniper before. Ask embarrassing questions to engineers, trying to explain, like, I don't think you can actually shut the interfaces on this, virtual Juniper image, and that ended up being a little bit confusing. So we ended up actually having to change the steps in the lab to reflect it, and basically all it was is we just shut the Cisco size to isolate it as part of the lab. But hadn't seen that one before. This is one of the things you may run into if you're trying to use virtual images like this to, lab out something. So it's something to keep in mind. Number 7 kind of goes in with a couple of the other slides, right? So if you're using something like NetMiko or Napalm, you may need to be careful to clean up your TTY sessions after. I think particularly with NetMiko, I don't know if we had this with Napalm, they could be doing their own cleanup after if you're just sending a command. But this is me hogging our maximum 4 for VTYs, so don't do that. Also, I've tried to obscure some of this, and I will say I've used coolu.edu in like so many unit tests now. It's my favorite university. You should totally go there. Okay, number 8. So this is a fun one, and for those who know me, you've probably heard me talk about E911 projects. I have a lot of feelings about them. So if you aren't familiar with E911, particularly on a campus, someone is going to use, a wired telephone, VoIP, use, their cell phone or something off Wi-Fi, and if they call 911, you need to know exactly where they are. And especially over the last pandemic kind of messes everything up time-wise, but within the last decade, there's been new laws coming out that kind of refine the requirements of, say, a campus. How specific do you have to get? And so step 1 of being able to accomplish these is you need to get base MAC. You need to get the MAC address of essentially what's going to be broadcasted to an endpoint over LDP. There are many ways to do this, and I don't think we did it the right way. But we essentially figured out the correct commands to send it over CLI to get the correct MAC address. And one of my favorites was some chassis. So you may get the wrong MAC address on some chassis by doing show chassis detail, versus some of our older chassis, we needed to run show spanning tree bridge. So that was interesting. I don't recommend doing this, but it ended up being very important. And I remember now, here at the bottom right, we actually had to write our own custom text FSM templates for a couple of our devices. One thing I didn't throw in this presentation is we actually had a case where we had what looked like the exact same platform, exact PIN, but we had different behaviors when we were trying to talk to it. One was like, I think, setting like boot flash versus flash, or goodness gracious, I'd love to get a screenshot of that one. That one sucked. Number 9, so more E911, but this time wireless style. So here's a snippet of code, and for some reason I'm not using that results variable over there, but that's not important. I wanted to include a code snippet just to kind of show kind of what it looked like. One of the things you'll notice is Max Workers 5. So my team, they're wireless engineers. We use Cisco Prime Infrastructure just for our APs. And so perhaps it was just the version at the time, but out of the box, it's rate limited for a given account, I would assume, to 5 calls per second. And even when I was trying to like max it out, really push the limit, it was slowing things down, which meant like it probably wouldn't want to raise things to allow me to push back. You probably don't want to raise the rate limit anyway if my wireless architect and my other wireless architect, he wasn't an architect, but he might as well have been, are saying, oh, Prime is slowing down. Well, good to know. Oh, goodness. Okay, so if you can't tell, it's like I'm seeing these slides for the first time again. It's the jet lag. So here's my last one, and this one's kind of wild. So you'll notice this very gross-looking Python code over here on the right. I have to assume that part of why this was written is because we might not have had a text FSM template for the commands that we needed to run on our wireless controllers that really did what we needed to do. You'll notice at the top, we're running show AP, WLAN 802.11b AP01. We actually, to get BSSIDs, to get the base MAC addresses of all these APs for E911, for every single radio, you have to query every single AP and collect all the BSSIDs. The fun thing about CLI scraping is the columns would actually vary by AP, and it was that one was one that I spent a lot of time in NetMiko, log level up, but that one was quite a headache. I don't know if they're still using code like this at the university, but if they are, hopefully they found a better solution by now. But it worked for what we needed. We were able to document all of the base MAC addresses and BSS IDs of our campus and upload them into our E911 platform. And we were able to do it with enough trial and error routinely and keep it up to date, because the second you put something in your source of intent, it's outdated, right? Unless you keep it updated. And so with that, hey, I got to the last slide. Thank you. So I will go ahead and open it up for questions, if anyone has any. I pretty much just took you guys on a ride, so it may not be too thought-invoking, except for I don't want to do this. So if that's your takeaway, fantastic. I've done my job.
So thanks very much for the talk. There was a lot of information, and I'm getting flashbacks from my CCAE days. Just, it's PTSD all over the place, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Also, there are other vendors. Life gets better, I promise. But the question was, with stuff like Cisco Archive, you think that you have the ultimate solution and you're going to be fine, and then you realize it does just not work consistently. But were you ever able to use Archive, especially from Cisco, to actually facilitate anything of value to the shareholders? Or, was it just this command is worthless and everyone involved with it should be shot?
I think more than anything, we never had an opportunity to really test that, really push it. The primary reason we used it and played around with it is because napalm requires it, right? And I have had instances where something fails and napalm's rolling it back, and I have no idea what it's actually doing at that time. It just seems to work, which is great. And I've never had a leftover config that I didn't expect to be there, except with firewalls don't do that. But yes, not a big fan of it, but we all do our best. Any other questions?
Yes. First of all, thank you. Hardcore, Shannon, hardcore. Especially screen scraping, wireless, AirOS wireless controllers. My head exploded a while back there. Thank you for sharing all kind of these lessons learned. You've obviously learned some brutal ones. Yes. Wow. What would you do differently? Because I think failures teach us a lot about how to do it better next time. What would you do differently?
Absolutely. So if I wanted to take more iterative steps, the thing I would do differently is, it was me in a corner with a colleague on a team, and we're network engineers, and we dabble, and we kind of figured out how to do this. And we didn't document, we rushed, and most importantly, because of our lack of experience, we were not able to provide good time estimates. We were fortunate in that our leadership was like, wow, this is amazing, I support you. We want this and this and this done, when can you do it? And we're bright-eyed and confident, and even with practice over a couple years, we still failed to come up with time estimates. And if we had a somewhat seasoned software developer on the team, that person would have come up and been like, don't do that. let me help you out. Let's just double it, Especially with something like this, there's so much trial and error and so much confusion, and it's so niche that this is the kind of thing where, especially when you're a little more junior, you'll spend a whole week on it. So kind of to loop back to your question, one of the biggest things I would change is wanting to learn how to do things right to begin with. And I think a big missing component of that would have been a software engineer or a software developer being able to come in, temporary or permanent, to help us get on the right path. We didn't even branch at the time. Everything was in main. Yeah, it was dark days. And so being able to have that, I think, would have set up future team members for success. And later on, the need was apparent even more, especially as there were software engineers that left the university. They left all this code behind I'm sorry. And when you don't have time, because you're setting bad deadlines, things are poorly documented and done wrong for easy wins. So that's really the big thing. There are more technical lessons learned, but I think that kind of has to come first. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, Vach Kompella. I think one of the things I'm taking away from what you've said is, other than vendor bashing, which is a fun thing to do once in a while, is actually that you're working with very fragile information. The way this is being rendered to you, the information you want to collect, and using CLI scraping is a terrible way for us as vendors to present information that you really need. And especially in today's world of automation, where that information has to be consistent and easy to access. I mean, this is a takeaway for us in the vendor community to figure out how to actually deliver stuff so that you don't have to write EU code.
I really appreciate that. And that's part of what I hope is going to come out of this. I was actually having a really meaningful conversation earlier this morning that kind of touched on that a bit. If there was a software product in the world that could have figured BSSIDs out for all our APs, all our radios, with our older wireless devices, because we can't afford to upgrade those, that sounds great. I'll buy it. I'll buy for $1. I think the biggest thing is it's a discovery process, both for us as a customer, as a university, as whatever entity for us. We have to discover what we need. And when you're having to get things that are a low enough level, we probably don't know what we need in that case. We're going to present a problem, and it's going to need so much more information in order to be able to answer that problem and have a solution. So I guess in short, it's keeping in mind that there's a discovery process for both parties is really useful. And to know that there are crazy, crazy things that network teams are asked to do. And so having synchronous communication and open sharing when trying to find a solution together is important. And also recognizing that neither party's information may be correct or going down the right path. So lots of communication. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Or see? Okay. So I'll take liberties and ask if there's one more question. Awesome. You've been a great crowd. Thank you all.